how did you get into writing about artificial intelligence? Like, can you explain to us the genesis of your interest in this topic?
I wrote a paper in my senior year of college, so, over 20 years ago, on the CD-ROM facsimile of a famous manuscript of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. And immediately I was hooked on this idea that modern technology is mediating medieval art in ways that bear on how we interpret medieval art, and that unless you are engaging with these objects in person, then you are always viewing them through some kind of, mechanistic or computerized filter. And so for me, that really started my interest in this. But there was also one other moment that was really critical to me, and it was something of a, not, I wouldn't say a throwaway comment, but it was something almost offhanded in a lecture that was being given by my doctoral supervisor, an architectural historian of Gothic art, Stephen Murray. And he gave us a little bit of a lecture on how many of the early scholars of Gothic art in 19th century Germany modeled their own theories on uh, natural sciences, like Georges Cuvier and some of these architects of what we now refer to as scientific racism, and how taxonomies of art, like what is Gothic and what is Romanesque, are really adopting a kind of scientific approach to art from the natural sciences. And I also, therefore, became really interested in what's happening when we scientize and quote unquote modernize what it is we're doing in the study of medieval art. So that's a long way of answering your question, but it's always been with me.
My name is Tina Rivers-Ryan, editor-in-chief at Artforum International, and I am joined today for our April 2025 episode of Under the Cover by Sonja Drimmer, who contributed a fantastic essay called Machine Yearning on generative AI and the structure of feeling to the current issue. Sonja is associate professor of medieval art and architecture at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, and also the author of The Art of Illusion, Illuminators and the Making of English Literature, 1403 to 1476 from the University of Pennsylvania Press. She also is somebody who has been writing extensively about artificial intelligence over the past few years, and we were so thrilled to be able to have her contribute an essay to this issue that focuses specifically on the rhetoric that is being used to advance the adoption of AI within the discipline of art history. So, Sonja, thank you so much for joining us today.
It is my pleasure to be in conversation with you, and I'm really honored to have a piece in Artforum, a publication that I have long admired. And yeah, it's just wonderful to be among the illustrious cohort of people who have published their thoughts and views in it.
I would love to begin just by asking you um, to give us a quick introduction to your text, which is both, I think, very dense and also very urgent and timely.
So, my essay offers something of a historical overview looking at the last 15 years or so of art historians thinking about, talking about, writing about the potentials for AI and art historical research. And what I've noticed over the last 15 years is that a rhetoric has emerged. Certain terms have come up repeatedly to describe what AI might do in some imagined future. And so I thought that I would write a piece that uses Raymond Williams' structures of feeling to describe how we are creating a structure of feeling about AI.
I was really struck by this one line that you had in response to the concept that somehow computer vision, by which we mean, using these software programs in combination with lens-based cameras and scanners, that it would somehow provide some type of insight that would otherwise not be available to the unaided human eye.
Hmm.
And your response to this is you say that this framing posits the algorithm as a form of alterity and otherness that aids in self-knowledge. And I wondered if you could say just a little bit more about that, because it's something I've been chewing over since reading your essay?
Well, there are a few things that I've bundled into that sentence. The idea that uh, AI has been pitched as an alterity, an otherness that helps us in seeing. And um, one of those things has to do with bias, right? So there's been a lot of conversations about how when an algorithm throws up, when computer vision throws up a result that, for example, just any old one, and this one it doesn't even necessarily rely on AI, but I'm thinking now of something like um, what we see in doing Google image searches, right? Uh, professor, and you just get white men with beards in front of blackboards, right? I don't think we need computer vision to help us see that. I really don't. I think these are things that we know, and I think that these are things that traditional art history, that scholars who have been deeply invested in the historiography of our field, getting back to this idea of taxonomies and categories, we have been talking about the biases built into our categories for 30 years now. And what I actually think is that this has become a really handy way to sell the value of using computer vision in what we do, because it's an unquestioned good that we should become aware of our biases, right? So, have we learned anything new? I do not think that we have. But if you can uh, launder some of what you're doing through social justice tropes, then you become very convincing in saying that we should be deploying computer vision in the practice of art history.
So it's not actually about necessarily the applications of computers in the classroom, let's say, right? It's about the rhetorical language that's being used to frame the utility, possibilities, advantages, et cetera, of AI. Because frankly, that's where we are, right? Like we're not even really talking about practical hands-on applications. We're talking instead about vibes, right?
Yeah, right. Hopes and dreams. And I get a lot of this from a number of scholars, but I'm thinking in particular of the scholarship of David Columbia, who passed away last year, and Cyber Libertarianism, an amazing book, and things that he wrote before that. And it really primed me to look out for the use of language that obscures the operations that are often behind certain kinds of technologies. Back in 2016, he was writing about the politics of Bitcoin. And what he was pointing to is that very successfully, the people who are promoting certain kinds of technology have figured out that if you use the language that sounds progressive, collaboration, freedom, accessibility, equity, but you don't actually say what's being made accessible, to whom, for what good, and why, then all that's doing is creating a space for people to fill in with their hopes and dreams. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot with respect to AI in education right now, and the university and museums.
And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you see as the stakes um, of the conversation around AI within the university context and how it's related to perhaps these larger, really troubling shifts that are happening at universities, not only in the past few weeks, but over the past few years.
Yeah, I mean, decades really. So, right now, what we are seeing is effectively an emergency in higher education because of divestment from it. Never mind the threats that are being leveraged by the state, right? But this goes all the way back to the 1980s and has been written about really well by Christopher Newfield, I think quite famously. Two of his books, The Great Mistake and Unmaking the Public University, talk about how after the gains that we saw to education, higher education, post-World War II, during this really wealthy period in America, when we saw uh, access to public education, creating some class mobility for Black Americans, for women. Now, granted, these gains were not distributed equally or equitably by any stretch of the imagination, but nevertheless, the gains were there. This was the same period when we see our first women and gender studies departments in the 1960s in California, our first Afro-American studies departments. And, some people with right-wing politics saw the writing on the wall that these intellectual movements that were emerging in the universities were a threat to unfettered free market capitalism. And so, beginning with the Reagan administration, we see a backlash and we see divestment from public education. And it was in the 1990s, as Daniel Green shows really well in his Politics of Access. He talks about secondary schools and libraries, but I think we can apply this to colleges as well, that this divestment from education is kind of filled in with support from technology businesses and corporations that promoted the solution to problems that we see with education is upskilling, bridging the digital divide, right? Introducing coding. Everything was about coding, right? And right now, this is just a continuation of that, yeah? That where the California State University system has just had its budget cut by something like 7% by Newsom. It's the same year that they've paid $16 million to OpenAI to bring ChatGPT to all of their students, right? So it's not really about AI replacing educators. It is about AI giving a permission structure to what governments and state legislatures want to do with education anyway, which is divest from it, right? Look over here at the shiny thing we're doing that's going to make your kid more viable for the market. Whether that's true or not, nobody's shown. So look over here. Don't look over here at the budget cuts.
As an art historian, I would love to just ask you, if I may, about the illustrations for your essay, because I have to say, as an editor, this text, while absolutely fascinating and insightful, was very challenging to illustrate because, of course, you're not really talking about artworks per se. You're talking about structures of feeling. And so, how do we illustrate the discourse, right? The rhetoric around AI?
I love it. I think it's gorgeous. And I'm so pleased to see that it's just full of bananas. And just for those of you who are watching and who haven't read the essay, I use the banana problem as shorthand for simply talking about what we see on the surface without considering the context of works of art or of movements like the adoption of AI into universities.
Speaking for myself, I'm always really pleased when we can get scholars in our pages who don't necessarily focus on contemporary art and who come from other subfields within art history, but who have, I think, a lot to say about how we look at images today, or about how artwork and visual culture being produced today is definitely in dialogue with or indebted to, in ways both conscious and unconscious, everything that has come before. So yeah, so I just, and also some people know that I'm not so secretly started out my career as a medievalist. And so I always love to be able to connect with and to live vicariously through medievalists who are out there in the world.
Well, I mean, it's something of a running joke among at least, among the contemporary scholars and medievalists that I run with, that students in graduate school who major in one minor in the other because they jibe so harmoniously. If you don't like naturalism, if you don't like the cult of the genius, if you like collaborative production, if you like stylization and abstraction, well, then medieval and contemporary are generally speaking for you.
Thank you so much, Sonia, for your time today, and can't wait to read your next book, and also your next piece on AI. I hope you continue to engage, for all of our sakes.
Forthcoming.